Hello there, welcome to the Saroy channel and welcome to my omnibus series. I've got so many of these omnibuses that are going to come out so that you'll be able to listen to an hour's worth of stories, which I know you're going to love. You know, the thing is that telling stories is such a fine art, and it's something that was practiced hundreds of years ago when people didn't have the technology that we have today. And everyone would gather around the fire and listen to a wonderful story. And also, what is so wonderful about a story is that personally, I think it is the best way to go to sleep. Every night when I go to bed, I always listen to stories. And that's something that parents used to do with their children. It's something that they still do with their children. There's nothing better than a good story. And so I hope you're going to enjoy this series. And before we start, I just want to say, do subscribe to my channel because you don't want to miss out on anything. Because I'm in for the long haul and I want to make sure that you get the most stunning stories to go to bed with at night or to listen to when you want to be one of those people sitting beside the fire and listening. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel and let's get started. I hope you're going to enjoy the omnibus. Dear Sarah and all your listeners, I'm writing to tell you about my experience with the creature that you listeners, or your listeners rather, call Bigfoot, Sasquatch, or the hairy man. I was a park ranger for about 20 years, and I truly believe it was the most wonderful job in the whole wide world, because your desk is really and truly the great outdoors or the natural world. And what could be more spectacular and fulfilling than that? I have never been motivated by money. You see, I always knew that money could never buy me the quality of life that nature provides. And believe me, I was right. Every day when I went out into the great outdoors or the natural world to check on wild animals in their natural habitats, I would sometimes have to pinch myself because I could not believe just how lucky I was to have such an amazing job. I can tell you and all your listeners with all sincerity that you could have given me $1 billion and I would not have swapped my job for all the tea in China. That is how magnificent nature is. And the great thing is, it doesn't cost you a dime. It's a gift of God. Over the years, when other people have been given jobs in wildlife, in protection or conservation, or other jobs in national parks, I have observed that people have changed so much. If they were previously reserved and a little on the shy side, I have seen them blossom and open up like a beautiful flower. Then there are those who were depressed or anxious, and I have seen them brighten up and become happy, like the loveliest colour. And then there are those who have been overly confident and maybe a little cocky, and I have seen them gain humility. So there is no better way to become balanced than to go out into nature. So a word of advice to all your listeners: if there is any imbalance in their lives of any kind, you can fix it by going out into nature and it'll all be sorted out, and that's a guarantee. Anyway, back to my story. One day when I was riding my black horse called Dandelion Darling, I noticed she was not happy about something, and it concerned me greatly, because she has never behaved in such a strange way before. In truth, she is one of the most docile, easygoing, and mellow horses that I have ever known. Nothing ever fazed her at all, and she took life in her stride. On this occasion, her ears were right back, her head was raised up, and she stood up on her hind legs and literally tried to throw me off her back, something that she's never done before. I got off her, and she literally bolted, galloping away in the opposite direction as fast as her legs would carry her. I had never seen my horse behave in such a fearful manner. As a park ranger, I naturally looked for the possible suspects, like a stalking predator of some kind or a snake in the grass. but I found nothing. One thing struck me as extremely odd, and that was everything was much quieter than usual, and that was very weird. There were no signs of the usual animals I would see on my daily excursions, and none of the usual bird calls you would usually expect to hear. Even though it was early in the morning, I just felt something wasn't quite right, but I couldn't put my finger on it. I suddenly noticed a very unpleasant odour in the air, like the smell of decaying flesh and damp, sweaty trainers. I did look around for the source of that sulphurous odour, and again I found nothing. I decided to venture towards the creek with its beautiful waterfall that literally cascaded from a high mountainous outcrop over the creek. It was always spectacular at the best of times. As I looked at the top of the mountainous ledge at the top of the waterfall, I could see the silhouette of a dark bipedal form, and it did not look totally human. It had an ape-like appearance, but it looked gargantuan, even though I was seeing it from a fair distance. I would estimate that even a grizzly bear was way smaller than this formidable-looking creature. The creature saw me, and he let out an enormous roar. Ah! I was absolutely terrified. As a park ranger, I can honestly say I have never felt so much anxiety rise up through my entire body. I almost felt as if I was having a sudden heart attack because I was barely able to breathe. I know now that I was actually experiencing what they call a panic attack. The creature looked at me one more time and threw a couple of rocks down the cascading waterfall, and I knew those rocks were meant for me, and they were huge. I just literally fled the scene, and I did not tell a soul what I had seen for fear of being disbelieved. I know that sounds crazy, but that's how I felt. What the heck was that, I would wonder over and over again over the course of several weeks. Many weeks passed, and life resumed to normal, and there was no sign of the monstrous creature, which for me was a monumental relief. I never wanted to encounter that thing ever again. Once in a lifetime was way too much for me. One day, at the park, a young girl called Chloe went missing, and there was no sign of her anywhere. Her mother told me that she had gone for a call of nature behind a large oak tree and then never returned. We recruited helicopters and every available source of help we could get, and there was absolutely no trace of the girl apart from one of her green hair ribbons that was found caught on a hedge of thorns. As you can imagine, the mother was frantic with despair and worry and anxiety, and she was certain that some kind of ill had become her daughter, or that her daughter had succumbed to a terrible fate. As a park ranger, I was also certain that something terrible had happened to her child, and almost convinced the child was dead. A day later, the child was found safe and well, and no worse for wear. Her mother told me that her daughter was saying some crazy stuff and was making all kinds of silly little stories up. I think the mother believed that her kid had wandered off. If that had been the case, we would have found her. Of that I can assure you. Those rescue helicopters do one hell of a job, and they rarely scan the terrain thoroughly, and so does the ground force. I asked her if I could talk to her child and take the kid for some ice cream, and her mother agreed. Chloe told me that two small monkey people took her to a little cave and they played games with her. How small were they? I asked. Chloe lifted her hands up to about 1.5 feet in height. What did you play? I asked her. She said they drew in the ground with sticks and they threw pebbles in the water and they played peekaboo. Did they talk to you? No, silly. Monkey men don't talk. They go like this, she said, making a funny chattering sound. And laughed. Did you see any big monkey men? I asked. only one, and she hid me from the big horrible one." "Why was he horrible?" I asked. "'Cause he growls and he's cross and he's big and scary." "Did he scare you?" I asked. She nodded her head. "What about the mother? Did you see her?" Chloe smiled. "She was nice. She hid me from the horrible big one." "Where did you hide?" "In the cave," she said. "Who brought you back?" I asked. "The monkey lady, silly." I could not get more out of the child, but I did go investigating the area where she was found. Luckily, the ground was still wet from heavy rainfall a week previous. It was there that I saw a gargantuan footprint that was about 20 inches, which I'm sure you appreciate is very huge. The large toe was splayed out further than a human toe, and there was a kind of ridgeline in the middle of the foot. At least that is what it looked like. I did make a plaster cast of it, but sadly over the years it has degraded considerably. But somehow I feel that finding the footprint where Chloe was found does add credence to the kid's story, and I do believe the child was not telling porkies. As for the monstrous creature, I did have an experience with him one more time while I was working at that park. Once again my horse bolted, leaving me stranded, and I was standing close to another water source at a different location in the park. I recognized all the warning signs, the quietness of the area, the odorous smell, and I also, on top of that, heard heavy breathing that scared the living daylights out of me because it sounded way too close for comfort. I recognized that I was being stalked because every time I took a step forward, so did it. If I stopped, it stopped too. Eventually I shot several rounds of ammo in the air, and the creature let out a huge roar. "Ah!" And then I saw this black shadow-like creature darting away with enormous strides, and all I could see was the black silhouette and gargantuan girth and width through the undergrowth. So that's my Bigfoot story. And yes, I believe that Sasquatches do exist in the forests of North America. Are they dangerous? I would say yes, but not all of them. It would seem most of them keep away from humans, but there are people who have had good and bad experiences with these creatures. And sometimes I gather Sasquatches have even helped people, like the mother helped little Chloe on that day. In the case of Chloe, I think she went for a wee, and I think her life was in danger because I think the large male Bigfoot was possibly around. I think the female Bigfoot, paternal's instinct, went into an overdrive and she ferried little Chloe away for safekeeping in the shelter of a cave, where Chloe played with her female young cubs. When the female Bigfoot thought the male was safely out of the way, she returned the child to a safe place where she knew humans would eventually find her. I hope you enjoyed my story. Thank you so much, Rory, for a fabulous story from a park ranger. I hope you believed it. Dear Sarah, I'm writing to tell you about my Bigfoot encounter that happened about 5 years ago in the spring of 2015. It was 2 o'clock in the morning and my cell phone started to ring, and that always creeps me out. I always get this horrible feeling when you get a call so early in the morning that I'm about to get the most horrendous news. I was not wrong. My sister phoned me to tell me that a very close friend of mine had just passed away suddenly. Her parents had found her only an hour earlier, just lying there deceased. No one knew what caused her untimely demise. I knew for a fact that she had no pre-existing health conditions, so her sudden death was an enigma to all of us. To say I was devastated was an understatement, because this friend of mine was as good as a sister to me. I literally curled up into a fetal position on the floor and I cried and I cried. Finally, I got it together and called my friend Bella, who lived right next door to me. I knew she would really understand the emotional turmoil I was going through. "Hello, is that you, Sandra?" I heard her say. "Why are you phoning me so early? Goodness gracious, it's 4 a.m, you know." "Brittany's dead," I told her. "I'm coming over now," she said. "I'll be there in a second. Keep it together, hold it together, I'll be there now." The next thing I knew, Bella was taking me into her loving arms and comforting me, and we both had a long cry together. "I know, let's go for a drive," she said suddenly. "Why don't we take a scenic route? I think some fresh air and scenery will help us get some perspective." It seemed like a great idea. It was still dark outside, but I could see the early glimmers of the morning sunrise. We drove a very scenic route, and we enjoyed the beautiful views. "Oh, I love those old redwood trees," sighed Bella. "Some of them have had several human lifetimes, you know. Do you know they're the most resilient of all trees because they can bounce back from any major damage? It's hard for them to die, you know." "I wish we could be as resilient," I said. "Oh, but we are," said Bella. "As raw as you may be feeling now, you'll bounce back like a redwood tree. It's only a matter of time. Time is the greatest healer, you know. You'll never forget, Brittany, but the pain will lessen, I promise you it will." I started to cry again, and Bella pulled over to the side of the road to comfort me. "I know it's hard," she said. "But why, oh why," I cried. "Why Brittany of all people? She of all people did not deserve this to happen to her." Just then we heard this humongous roar. "Ah! Ah!" It sounded just like a lion, and then it happened again. "Ah!" "Did you hear that?" said Bella, looking aghast. In a second my tears had dried up and my attention was aroused. "What the hell was that?" I asked. We heard the roar again, and then we saw this large, gargantuan, dark form running from the tree line. As it was a fair distance away, we thought for a moment that it might have been a man. "What on earth is a guy doing in the woods at this time?" said Bella, looking at her watch. "It's 5:10, she said. Suddenly we saw the creature coming in our direction as he moved as fast as the wind, with a bounce to his step. "What the heck is that?" said Bella. "It's way too large to be a man." The man-like being, or whatever he was, seemed to be chasing something small, keeping his eyes peeled to the ground like an owl hovering over its prey. As he did this, he was venturing closer to us, so we finally had a good view of him. Suddenly he pounced on the thing in the grass with lightning speed and seized it in his large, dexterous hands. He pounded the bird, and then he squatted on the floor. He proceeded to tear away the feathers one by one, placing them in a neat pile beside him. He then ate the bird like it was a candy bar, bones and all. Bella and I looked on in astonishment, hardly believing what we were seeing with our naked eyes. Even the thought of Brittany's death was momentarily postponed as we were transfixed by this creature. But what was he, we wondered? And then in unison we both said at the same time, "It's a Bigfoot!" The creature was bipedal, but I bet he could run on all fours because, like a monkey, he had long arms that went way beyond his knees. His hands looked almost human. I noticed his body was covered with dark brown hair that looked matted and horrible, as if he'd been rolling around in the mud. The creature was about 7 foot tall, and when he stood erect, he had a large chest that tapered down towards slender hips and long, lean, muscular legs. The creature must have felt our stares or just sensed us looking at him, because he looked up at us as he was eating, momentarily surprised, as if suddenly caught off guard. But he continued to eat while staring at us a little longer, with those curious, brown, inquisitive eyes. His face had a humanness to him, but he was not human. Yet I could sense that he had superior intelligence compared to other animals. Our gazes locked into a kind of hypnotic kind of trance, and then the creature turned away, and in seconds he was gone, with his half-eaten bird still in his hands. Bella and I marvelled at what we had seen, and we knew it was a privilege to witness something like this. The next day we decided we would venture in the woods to just see if we could see any more signs of the creature. We did find a nesting area strewn with bones and animal carcasses, and we did see tree snaps, but nothing else, nor did we smell anything. I did think my encounter with the Bigfoot did help in my grieving process over Brittany's death, because I wasn't just dwelling over the death, but also meditating on the Bigfoot sighting and what I had seen that day. I was in awe of the creature, because although primitive in many ways, he did have a humanness to him. To cut a long story short, the autopsy revealed that Brittany had died from a brain aneurysm. So there you are. There was a Bigfoot encounter that I shall never forget. I hope your listeners and you enjoyed my story. Thank you very much for that really wonderful story. I've got a lovely story for you that you're really going to enjoy. So let's get started. It comes from Nina, all the way from California. And it's a very special story. She calls it the pizza party. Let's get started. Dear Sarah, my name is Nina, and my Bigfoot encounter happened in the summer of 2013 here in California. I was a divorcee at the time, who was now married to my second husband, Clark. I had inherited a stepson called Eric, who was only 12 years old at the time, and we also had a kid of our own, Mark, who was 5. My other child, Ethan, who was now 16, lived with my ex-husband in Manchester in England, and we made frequent arrangements for him to stay with me in California at least once a year for 3 weeks. It was Ethan's summer vacation, and he had come to stay in our cozy Californian home. He had grown up so fast. He was now 16 years old, over 6 foot tall, and very well built for a boy of his age. I was not surprised to find that he was in fact the captain of the football team at his school in England. I noticed that Ethan's American accent had faded, and I could hear that he had gained a very distinctive Manchester drawl. I also noticed that he was a huge practical joker, much to my growing annoyance. The target of all his practical jokes was Eric, Clark's 12-year-old son. Ethan had placed a roach in Eric's shoe one day and was delighted by the horrified look on Eric's face when he crunched the roach with his feet as he put on his shoes. Ah! Then another time Eric had found a snake in his bed and screamed to high heaven, "Oh, oh!" It was only a harmless grass snake, but poor Eric did not know this at the time, and the incident completely freaked him out. Then the final straw for me was when Ethan put earthworms into Eric's pasta and watched in delight as Eric took a mouthful of wiggling earthworms that were covered in Parmesan cheese and tomato sauce. "Oh, yuck! Your expression," he said, hooting with laughter. "It's a picture." I could see that Eric was not coping with all Ethan's practical jokes, and I was not happy with my son's crazy ideas. He was behaving like a buffoon, I thought. "Why are you picking on your little stepbrother?" I commanded. "You keep terrifying him with your jokes, and they're not funny, not one little bit." "Oh, come on, Mum. It's no big deal. It's only a bit of fun." "Is there not something a little bit more constructive you could do with your time?" I asked him. "How about going for a walk in the woods, or going running around the area? There's a lot you can do here in California, you know." Eric was having his birthday in a few days, and I suggested that he invited his friends over for a pool party and a pizza eating competition. "The child who eats the most pizza will win a prize," I declared. I thought it would be such a wonderful idea. Eric loved the idea. We had a large pizza oven on the entertainment area of our patio that overlooked our large, beautiful kidney-shaped swimming pool. It was the perfect setting for a wonderful children's party, I thought. It was all going to be so much fun, and Eric was eagerly messaging all his friends to invite them. "Oh, Mum!" he cried out in delight. "All my friends are raving over the pizza eating competition idea. It's a brilliant idea. I'm so excited." Unfortunately, I did receive a phone call from an irate mother who was not happy about my pizza eating competition idea. "Is that Nina?" she asked. Yes, it is, I replied. This is Amelia Harris speaking. I'm Trevor's mother. Oh, yes, I said, I do remember. Well, she tattered, I'm not happy about this pizza eating competition. You know, obesity is such a huge issue in this country, and you're encouraging our kids to pig out. I'm afraid Trevor will not be able to come under the circumstances. Look, Amelia, it's just a one-sort thing, a little fun for the kids, you know. Fun, she snapped. Wait until your kid is 500 pounds and counting. What's fun about that? Look, Mrs. Harris, I said, let's just agree to disagree. I'm sorry Trevor cannot come, but the kids love the idea about the pizza competition, and it's going to be heaps of fun. You should reconsider Trevor coming. He really would enjoy himself. I could hear Trevor's mother cut me off on the line. There's no pleasing everyone, I thought. This party was already causing me problems. You've always got those mothers who are so politically correct. But what could I do? It was on a Sunday afternoon when we had the birthday party for my son. All the young boys arrived at the party, looking very excited. I have not eaten anything, said a little boy called Tony. I'm going to stuff my face and win the prize, he said, with a sparkle in his blue eyes. No, I'm going to win it, said the other. I've been practicing ever so hard. I laughed at the eagerness of all the participants, and I said, let's get started. I placed large slices of pizza on everyone's plate, and the competition began. It was a thin little boy called Stephen who won the prize of a one-man tent, which he was thrilled with. The boy had managed to guzzle his way through 12 slices of pizza. He stuck out his tongue to prove he had really swallowed it all, and everybody was clapping in delight. The party was going swimmingly, and everyone was having a wonderful time. You could tell by the large volume of excitable voices, laughter and chatter among the children. I watched the kids diving into the pool and others playing Marco Polo in the water. And then I noticed Ethan. He was watching Eric and his friends playing in the pool, and I could see a roguish look developing on his face. He looked as if he was up to no good. I groaned. Oh, no. He's up to something, I thought. Please, God, don't let him ruin Eric's party, just when things are just going so perfectly. I had these hideous visions of him putting a rat on Eric's birthday cake, or piles of salt into the child's Coca-Cola. I knew if I needed to keep tabs on him, so I would watch his movements closely, I thought, so I could stop him bringing on one of his nasty practical jokes that would scare the kids. I also had visions of horrified mothers phoning me after the party, telling me that their child was permanently traumatized for life because of one of Ethan's hideously inappropriate pranks. Oh, there he is, I thought, seeing a large bit of big black fluff hiding behind the girth of our oversized oak tree. I can see you, Ethan, I thought. What's he up to? I watched as he started peeking at the kids, and I could see he was wearing some kind of an ape costume. Oh, no, you don't, I thought, making a sudden dash towards the tree. There he was, standing there in his hideous costume and smelling like he had rolled in the cat's litter. This is not funny, I said, shaking my finger at him, scolding. These practical jokes have got to stop now, do you understand? Eric just stood there with a look of surprise written all over his face. I saw you slouching around with a good-for-nothing look on your face. I knew you were up to something, and I've had more than I can take. Now go and take off that disgusting costume and have a shower while you're at it. You smell quite disgusting. Eric just stood there looking at me and not saying a word. I watched him scurrying away, looking quite guilty and sheepish. Where is he going, I wondered. A few minutes later I saw him again. At least he'd removed the horrible costume, I thought. That would have definitely traumatized the kids. I thought he was talking and laughing with another kid. My word, he really got out of that costume fast. I did not think more about it until the next day. Where did you get that ghastly-smelling ape costume from? I asked him. It almost looked real. What costume? Asked Ethan. The one you were wearing yesterday, when you were hiding behind the big oak tree. Mum, you've lost me, he said. I wasn't wearing any ape costume, nor was I hiding behind any tree. Are you sure? I asked. Or are you playing games with me? Of course I'm sure. I think I would know, don't you, if I got dressed up as an ape? For a moment I was spellbound. You're not winding me up, are you? No, Mother, I'm not. Well, who was it that dressed in that ape costume at the party? No one came in fancy dress, Mum, said Eric, listening to the conversation. Are you sure about that? Mum, I think I would know if someone dressed up as an ape, don't you? I was suddenly hit with the realization that the creature I saw hiding behind the tree might have been real after all. I tried to remember what I had seen. The creature had been tall and broad like Ethan. He was at least 6 foot, I thought. He'd been slender and broad-shouldered, just like Ethan again. And come to think of it, he had a shaggy, hairy brown coat that did smell very strongly of cat urine and maybe a bit of skunk as well. I was horrified. Had I been scolding a real-life ape man? Had I encountered the hairy man they call Bigfoot? It was almost impossible to believe. I went back to the drawing board and did some research on Bigfoot, and although the creature was smaller than average, he might have been a juvenile, I thought, which was plausible. I recounted the expression of surprise on the creature's face when I had scolded him. I remember the face looked real, but I just thought it was a quality costume. Why was the creature peeking in on the children, I thought. Maybe as a youngster he was curious. He would have smelt the delicious smells from the pizza oven, I thought, and heard the excited cries of the kids, and yes, the woods was only over the road. I decided to venture into the garden behind the oak tree, and there in the moist brown earth was a single large footprint measuring 18 inches. I now knew for certain I had seen the hairy man we call Bigfoot, and I'd only been 1 foot away from his face as I had scolded him. I hope you liked my story. Nina, lovely, lovely story. I hope you believed it, guys. What a wonderful story, because it's all the way from Saskatchewan in Canada, and it's a wonderful story about a hunter's encounter with Bigfoot. So let's get started. Dear Sarah, and to all your listeners, hello there. I'm so eager to tell you about what happened to me on my Saskatchewan deer hunting experience. I simply love going to this area in Canada because it is remote and breathtaking, and you do not get loads of hunters there, so you can nearly always grab a hefty deer if you're lucky. They have really big deer there, which is why I love going there. I used to go hunting every single November with a group of 6 other hunters. I love going in November. I know it's bitterly cold, but the snow on the pine trees is simply breathtaking. It's truly a winter wonderland and a snowy paradise, so to speak. At the camp every morning, we would get up at 5:30 sharp to go hunting. We would eat a delicious, hearty, warm, filling breakfast, and then we would be taken by our tour guide for an hour and a half to our hunting location point. We would then drive on quad bikes through the snow and woodland forests to find our hunting position. Where we went was determined by where we would find the deer located. That would be the perfect area to shoot. I know it sounds easy, but I promise you it is not. Going shooting, especially in freezing conditions, is definitely not for the faint-hearted. It took me several days to get lucky. It was only on day 6 that I managed to take down a large deer. He was a perfect specimen of a buck, massive in size as deers go, with huge antlers that were very impressive. Naturally, I did have several shots taken of my golden moment when I hit the jackpot, because it's not every day that you bring down a deer that size. I returned back to the camp on that day, elated because of my beautiful catch. When we got back to the camp, we are always exhausted, overwhelmed and famished. So they tend to give us this most huge hearty meal, and then we go back to bed and we crash out because of our exhaustion. It was on day 7 when things did not go too well for me. We were all on our quad bikes and had arrived at the spot where we were going to start our shoot, and naturally I was very excited and enthusiastic. There was plenty of deer around the vicinity, so we knew that we would have a good spot to start shooting from. It was then that I realized that I'd lost my army knife. I discovered it had slipped through a newly formed hole in my jacket, and given that my jacket was brand new, this was truly a bummer for me. My army knife was priceless as a possession. It had been given to me by my father after my first deer hunting expedition. It was after I had taken down my first big deer, and it was a memento for that special occasion. As my dad was no longer alive, it held even more of an emotional attachment to me. I just knew that I had to find it, and I definitely felt it in my pocket when we were riding our quad bikes, so I knew that I must have dropped it very, very recently. Surely it would not be too hard to find, I thought. I told the tour guide that I wanted to backtrack the way we'd come so that I could recover the pocket knife. He told me that it was against the rules of the expedition, but when I told him why it was so important to me, he got ever so sentimental. "All right," he said. "Now this is strictly against the rules. I don't want anyone finding out about this, so be careful. And if you're not back in 20 minutes, I'll be coming after you," he warned. I got back on the quad bike and tried to retrace the way we'd come, but it suddenly started to snow pretty heavily, and the tracks of our quad bikes had all but grown fainter and were barely visible. This was bad luck, I thought, and I was not sure I was even going the right way anymore. It was so easy to get lost out here, and I was beginning to realize that looking for a white pocket knife in the white snow would not be the easiest job. I was sad to lose that pocket knife, but I suddenly came to the practical realization that as sentimental as it was to me, I just wasn't going to find it in these crazy conditions. I began to get worried that I might have gone completely off course, and I might be lost. It just did not look like the way we'd come. The familiar landmarks had all but vanished, and I think I was lost. Suddenly I felt well and truly alone. I began to feel isolated, vulnerable and afraid. I was sure, now absolutely certain, that I was lost. I began to get the impression that I was being stalked by something. I could see movements behind the tree and was certain that some predator had its eyes on me. I knew instinctively that this aggressor was dangerous, even though I could not see it. My hands became clammy with sweat, despite the cold, and I clutched my rifle so tightly that my hands began to ache with pain. I could not seem to even aim my rifle, and what was the point of aiming it? Because I didn't know what I was aiming it at. I couldn't see my predator, and that was the most unsettling thing about it all. My mind was screaming, "Run! Get away!" But my body just wouldn't shift. I was frozen to the spot and breathing so heavily with a fear I have never known. My heart was pounding, and it started beating even faster, and then I began to smell this horrible wet dog combined with dead carcass kind of smell, and it was really nasty. Then I saw her. She did not hide from me any longer. It was clear she wanted me to see her. She was several feet away from me, and her eyes were fixed on me like a tiger focusing on its prey. She stood at 7.5 feet tall. She was heavy set with a huge chest, dangling breasts, and massive lean legs. Her whole body was covered with black hair, except for the knee area. And of course her face. Her face had a primate ape-like quality to it, and she was definitely bipedal, although I suspect she could walk on all fours with effortless ease. I could see that she had the stealth of a cheetah and the agility of a house cat. I would estimate that she could have been 800 pounds easily, because she was bigger than even a grizzly, and she was very, very lean. Her whole body was solid muscle without an ounce of fat, with the exception of perhaps her breast tissue. I knew that even if I did have the courage to shoot her, she would be way, way too agile to get a clear shot of, and then I would be the one in the greatest of danger, especially if she turned on me. What to do was the question. This creature is going to kill me, I thought. I could feel her anger and her seething rage. It seared through me like the sharpest knife, cutting through every core of my being. I could see two of her youngsters peering at me behind a tree, and then I knew why. They were only 1 foot in height and must have been extremely young juveniles. I knew nothing was more dangerous than a protective mother and her cubs, and this bipedal creature, whatever as it was, growled at me with a warning that was clearer than day. "Ah! Get out or I'll kill you," she roared. That's what I felt in my spirit that she was saying, yet I could not move. I was frozen like a rat in a snake cage, knowing that my demise was inevitable. That was how it felt to me. Death was coming, and I thought I was about to surrender to her with the final acceptance of my fate, for there was no way out for me. I was a goner, and I knew it to the depths of my heart. Suddenly I heard gunshots, and in the distance I could see my guide approaching me. The creature disappeared in an instant, and my guide was looking extremely annoyed. "Where did you get to?" he complained. "You're totally off the beaten track. I told you not to be longer than 20 minutes. And boy, I see you've encountered a black bear, and they can be problematic, I assure you." I realized that he thought he had scared off a bear, but in reality, the truth was very surreal. I realized in horror, as I started to think about it, that I had been hunted by a Sasquatch, or a Bigfoot, which for me was a character in a children's novel. Now I knew different. I knew a whole different reality, and everything in my life had suddenly shifted. I knew that my life would never ever again be the same, because this creature that I felt never existed does in fact exist in the forests of North America, Canada, and probably other parts of the world too. Everyone at the base noticed how rattled I'd become, and they believed it was because of my bear encounter, but of course I knew differently. My father's pocket knife was never retrieved, and I never returned for the deer hunting season the following November. I thought the deer that I'd brought down was the prize of the season, but now I know meeting a Sasquatch face to face is something few humans have ever experienced or ever will. So for that, I am grateful in a strange sort of way. I hope you enjoyed my story. Thank you for that. I've got a very interesting story for you tonight, and you're going to just love it. I don't know if any of you have heard of what was known as the Great Storm of the Century that happened in 1949, and we've got a fabulous account from Irene all the way from Nebraska telling us about her Bigfoot encounter and, of course, all about the storm of the century. So this is one special recording. Let's get started. Dear Sarah and all your listeners, my name is Irene and I'm from Nebraska. I'm writing to tell you and your lovely listeners about my experience with the hairy man, otherwise known as Bigfoot or Sasquatch. Most of your listeners are way too young to have ever heard of the Great White Death or the Storm of the Century, which happened to me when I was a young girl of only 15 years old. If you do the math, you will realize how old I really am. Today I'm afraid I'm a little old lady with poor eyesight and a rather frail body, but other than that I'm still in reasonably good health, and my memory is as sharp as ever. I still remember the great day of the storm as if it was yesterday. It was January the 2nd, 1949, and a cold front from Canada collided with Arctic air from the south and pummeled Colorado, Nebraska, Wyoming, and the Dakotas with heavy snow, fearsome blizzards, unrelenting winds, and sub-zero conditions. As a young girl, I was raised by my dad because my mother died in childbirth. I never knew what it was like to have a mother. Growing up, my dad did an incredible job at fulfilling both paternal roles, so I do not believe I missed out. You see, my dad was a remarkable man whom I dearly loved. I remember that on January the 1st, 1949, it actually started as rather a nice day to begin with, until things changed at about 4 o'clock in the afternoon, which was when the blizzard-like conditions made their appearance known. My dad was an awesome vet, and everyone in Nebraska used and valued his services. He was brilliant with animals of any kind, including the native wildlife in our area, which he often rescued. On the day the storm hit Nebraska, he had a last-minute call-out at a neighbouring farm, who wanted my dad to check up on a few of their heifers that seemed a little poorly. "I won't be long," my father told me. "Keep warm, I'll be back soon." He picked up his medical bag and left the house swiftly. Of course, my father was not back soon. Little did I know that I would be stuck in the cabin for 2 whole weeks until I even got to see him again. It must have been about 3:30 when the phone rang that day. "Hello, Irene. It's Pippa here. How are you?" "Fine, and how are you?" "I'm afraid I've got a bit of bad news. Your dad had a freak accident. Unfortunately, one of the cows kicked him in the head when he was examining her. I'm really sorry." "Is he going to be okay?" I asked. "Irene, don't worry," came Pippa's reassuring voice on the other end of the line. "He's just sustained a slight concussion, that's all. Otherwise, he's absolutely fine. But the doc does want to give him a few days and keep him under observation for a while. But he'll be back soon, I promise." "When can I see him?" I asked. "Soon, I'm sure. Your father asked me to tell you to call your Aunt Gladys and get her to come and stay with you. He doesn't like the idea of you being alone in the cabin. You'll do that, promise me?" "Oh, yes, I will," I said. "Thanks for phoning. Goodbye, Pippa." I put the phone down with tears of relief pouring down my cheeks. Poor Dad, I thought. Things could have turned out so differently. Thank goodness he was going to be fine. It was 3:30 and I found myself beginning to get very cold. I wrapped myself in more layers of clothing, stoked up the fire, warmed up some hot chocolate, and put on the radio to listen to the weather forecast. "And now for the weather report," said the commentator. "Emergency alert. Very dangerous, hazardous conditions out there, folks. Make sure you stay indoors. Blizzards and heavy snow is forecast in the next couple of hours. Wherever you are, get home as quickly as you can. Not looking good out there, folks. It looks like a storm is brewing. Stay safe whatever you do, stock up with firewood, and keep warm. This is Radio Nebraska, keeping you posted at all times." I was shocked. There was no way I was going to call Aunt Gladys. I did not want to worry her about Dad unnecessarily. And besides, I was more than capable of looking after myself, I thought. I certainly didn't need a babysitter. I was way too old for that. I decided to bring in a lot of firewood from the barn so that I would not have to brave the elements on my own, and then I sat by the warm, crackling fire and finally fell into a deep, cosy sleep. I was awakened by the sound of heavy winds blowing across the whole valley. They were so fierce that even the windows and the doors of the cabin rattled violently. This was quite some storm, I thought, but I had no clue just how bad it was to become. The next day I looked out of the kitchen window and I was shocked by the scene that I saw and how heavy the snow had fallen overnight. The noisy winds still prevailed and the whole cabin literally shook from their wrath. I knew that I would not want to be out in this weather under any circumstances. I switched on the radio. This is Radio Nebraska, keeping you posted at all times. The eastern and southeastern parts of Nebraska have been hit hardest by these storms. There are reports of 40-feet snowdrifts and animals that have frozen to death overnight. Snowplows have already been deployed in various areas. Reports coming through suggest that many out there are marooned in their cars. Help is on its way. No need to panic, folks. Wherever you are, stay indoors. It's getting worse, folks, so keep warm. Wow, this was some storm, I thought. I'd never seen anything like this in all my life. The winds were getting worse and the snow outside our front door was 2.5 feet high. I had never experienced snow like this. These were truly hazardous conditions. Once again I found myself staring out of the window, despite the treacherous conditions and howling winds that literally whistled non-stop. I could not help thinking how beautiful everything was. The thick snow just carpeted the whole valley, and it did look magnificent, even though it was treacherous. At that moment, despite the fact that visibility was not good, I could see the shape of 3 people in the snow. I wondered who would be out there in these chaotic conditions. What are they doing, I wondered? Are they completely crazy? I quickly put on my heavy coat and my snow boots and warm hat and warm gloves and ventured out the front door. "Hi there," I called. "Is everything all right?" But my voice was washed away by the howling winds, and I do not think that people heard me. As I got closer to the 3 people, I stopped still in my tracks. These were not people, I thought. What were they? I just stood there and stared, and I was so shocked by what I was seeing, I think my shock literally crushed any fear response on my part. The creatures were bipedal. One was definitely a male because I could see his genitalia very clearly. The other was a female because she had breast tissue. And then there was a juvenile that must have been their cub. I knew that they were not totally human because they had ape-like features. They were exceptionally tall, well over 7 feet, but the youngster was about 2 feet tall. The male was exceptionally huge. He could have weighed at least 800 pounds because even his chest was about 5 feet across in circumference. The creatures were big in girth and stature, and their bodies were covered with dark brown hair that reminded me of a bear. If you saw them from a distance, you would have easily mistaken them for bears. The big giveaway that these creatures were not bears, nor were they humans, were of course their long arms that fell well beyond their knees, and their heads, which were distinctly cone-shaped. I could not detect much of a neckline, but the faces possessed some human-like qualities, like flat noses and thin mouths, but the eyes I noticed were dark and more like a monkey's than a human's. Suddenly all 3 pairs of eyes were fixed on me, and they studied me for a moment, and then nodded at me as if they were saying hello. I nodded back. They continued to walk, not even looking behind them once. I watched them literally glide over the snow with effortless ease. And remember this, the snow that day was several feet deep. I saw them making their way towards my father's barn, and then they entered it. I realized suddenly that they were looking for shelter to keep out of the elements. I felt happy for them being out of the cold and away from that horrible wind that would not stop howling. I knew my father's barn was very cozy because it was initially another cabin that was eventually converted into the barn, so it was extremely well insulated. I know it may sound odd to you and your listeners, but I was glad to not be totally alone, and these creatures never once, not for even a brief second, made me feel afraid. In fact, I felt strangely comforted that they were around, and even safer, as weird as that sounds. Why I felt that way, I do not know, but I did, maybe in my gut, sense that these creatures were harmless for me. I learnt growing up that your gut never lies. So one word of advice, listen to it, folks. I loved watching the creatures every day through my window that overlooked the barn perfectly. The little one would throw snowballs at his mother and would slide down some of the snowdrifts in the valley that had become high hills. You could tell he was having the time of his life, and he was so comical to watch that I would find myself on many occasions laughing hysterically. The mother would ruffle his head in a loving way, and sometimes it looked like she would be looking for nits as she ran her fingers through his black mane while examining his scalp. I would only venture into the barn to get firewood when all three of the creatures were playing out in the snow, as I did not want to disturb them when they were in the barn taking shelter. I noticed that they played a lot and were a very close family, and their energy levels were through the roof. The first time I got firewood was my last time, because the male creature would leave a pile of firewood out of the front door every day for me, which really made me realize how intelligent and generous these creatures were. In return, I would throw apples in the snow and my buttered homemade bread plastered with peanut butter and jelly, which I would watch them eat with looks of great pleasure on their faces. On one occasion, I saw the male creature carrying a big frozen cow, which he slung over his shoulder as if it was nothing. I could hardly believe anything could be so powerful and strong. I think he was carrying that cow from a neighboring farm, because it had obviously died overnight due to the exposure. The first few days of the storm were terrible, with wind speeds of up to 80 miles an hour. The storm lasted for 2 whole months. I gathered on the radio that 7 people lost their lives and many farm animals froze to death in the bitter conditions. There were people who got trapped in their cars for over 3 days, and one man described it as being worse than being in a concentration camp during the war. That's how bad it was. The snow plows would be forever on the go, because hours later they would be back again, ploughing on the same snow area all over again. Some snow had to be literally blasted because it became as hard as cement. Cars and cows were found buried beneath snowdrifts, and in Harrison County, the snowdrift was as high as a telephone pole. There were also weird phenomena reported during these hazardous conditions. One day an upside-down rainbow was seen in the sky, and there were reports of thunder and lightning, as well as a lot of static electricity. One man noticed sparks coming out of 6 of his rifles, all at the same time. People came together and everyone helped each other from all walks of life, so it was an amazing time from a humanitarian point of view. As for me, I remained alone in the cabin for 2 weeks until my dad returned. He was surprised that I had been through those harrowing blizzards all on my own, but then again, I had not been all on my own, had I? Once the bad weather receded, I did not see the creatures again. When they left, I heard a wood knock on my door and a whistle. I watched them leave the barn with tears in my eyes. I knew I would miss them. A year later, I found my dad's basket filled with orchard apples on our doorstep. No one knew who they were from, but I did. I knew they were from the creatures who were saying thank you. It is only in recent years, with all the television coverage and exposure, that I found out what these creatures were, and I now know they were Sasquatch. Is Bigfoot misunderstood? Maybe, maybe not, I cannot say. People have had terrifying encounters, and some have had great encounters. Mine was great, a truly joyous experience, one I shall never forget. So there you are, that's my story. Whether you believe it or not, that's fine too. On my part, I know it happened, and Bigfoot has a special place in my heart and always will, because he made the storm of the century a memorable and special time for me in Nebraska at age 15. Love to you and all your listeners, Irene. Thank you, Irene, for such a lovely story. Well, hello there. I hope you enjoyed the omnibus edition. We've got many more coming our way for you to listen to. Sending you love wherever you are in the world, in North America, Canada, Kenya, wherever you may be. I send you lots and lots of love. Thank you for listening to my omnibus, and I really do hope you enjoyed it, because that's the whole idea about it, is to give you some interesting stories to listen to. So until next time, goodbye and good night.